1813, the town and the church were burned down. The walls of St. Mark's stood fast. This is 1840 something, and that's 1790 something. The first time I was in this church, I was a very young child, and I always wanted to go to St. Mark's, but it was somewhat sacred and scary. It was filled with a lot of mystery and wonderment, and that stuck in my mind all of these years. The sexton is the person who takes care of the cemetery. The sexton will organize burials that will take place and any of the management of the cemetery. The original church was simply the nave, this portion in front. It was like a shoebox style. And there was a tower on the west end of the church, probably partially to act as some kind of beacon for ships sailing across the lake and trying to find port. By the time we got to the 1830s, it was too small. So Crean, who was then the priest, organized for the building of the transepts, which I am sitting in, and the altar. And at that point, the interior of the church had a gallery which went all around. And that was, I think, partly because there were so many people in Niagara at that point. The church was very busy and very full. Also, the gallery was used by the military when they came to services, so they're kind of out of sight. The main body of the church was filled with box pews. Practical and interesting. They were, you had the pew, had a door at the end. You came in to your pew, which belonged to your family, and you closed the door, and you were in your own private little living room, I suppose, within the body of the church. In the end of the 19th century, when the church was changed considerably, the galleries were removed except the one at the back, and the box pews were taken apart and used as the wainscoting which surrounds the interior now. And these very contemporary, for the time, pews were installed, changing greatly the look of the interior space. One of the things that I think makes this interior space so interesting is that people from the beginning to the present have been playing around with it. And so it bears little resemblance to the original church. I suppose the only real connection to the original church is the fact that the floor, I can see where the flooring is cut, and this is the end of the original church. That's right, this is 1840 something, and that's 1790 something. The windows previously were kind of half covered by the galleries, so you remove the galleries and the interior space is flooded with light. The stained glass adds a whole new atmosphere to the interior of the church. Rather than, as I said before, this blaze of light, you had varying shades of color and changing constantly as the sun changes location or the weather changed. And now the window that's directly behind me over the high altar is the first piece of colored glass that's in the church. We believe that it's from 1839, 1840 maybe, period. It's the only glass of this type that exists within the province of Ontario. Once that was done, then it changed the balance of light within the church, because the windows in the nave and the windows in the south transept were still clear glass. So at that point, the priest decided he would ask a parishioner if she would consider putting a window on this side in colored glass. And she said yes. And he said, well, you know, 2 would be better than 1. And she was blackmailed, I guess, into putting in a second window. So after that, the windows were added slowly. And the final window was added in the 1960s. It seems out of temper with the other windows. And it I think, is very beautiful. It's a depiction of St. Mark. The style is totally different. Now, it's felt that these windows are the finest collection of windows in the province, because we go from the 1840 all the way to the 1960s, with everything kind of in between. And they're all made by, with the exception of that one, they're all made by the same company, which doesn't seem logical because the style of that one compared with that one is very different. But what would happen is that the man who did that window had his little secrets of how to paint the glass, how to tone the glass, how to put it together. And when he died, he took the secrets with him. So the next guy had to start from scratch. The windows also provide stories, and they provide something for people to look at and think about if they're in church prior to service, or maybe even during service, they're looking at the window and not listening to the priest. They create an atmosphere that is very different from simple, plain, clear glass. Well, I would think that in the beginning, the notion was that the people in the gallery would have a hard time always seeing the priest. And so if you put the pulpits up here, then they are visible, he's highly visible to the people in the galleries as well as down below. They also, if you look above the pulpit, the form and construction of the ceiling provides a little fan-like structure that will project the voices outward. And there are the 2 pulpits, because this one is the reading desk, where the priest will read from the Bible, and this one is the preaching desk. So the sermon is here. The reading is here, the sermon is here. Acoustics is a rare art form, and I think now people, architects, designers, when they're creating concert halls or theaters, are always hoping to have something, a space that's acoustically perfect. If you sit in that back corner, you can hear as well as if you sit in the front right here. Why this happened, I don't know. It probably is something to do with the material, the plaster and the wood, plus all of the bodies sitting in the pews, make it acoustically perfect. Now, it's acoustically perfect for music and some voices, yet there are some voices in here, you can't hear them at all. You could probably hear the voice from this high pulpit better than you could hear the voice from somebody standing there. It's a very tricky science. Certainly musicians are happy to record in this space or give concerts in this space. But I think it was accidental. Well, in the late 1700s, there were many loyalists who had arrived at Fort Niagara, and they were crossing the river to take up land in this part of Canada. And it was a fairly rowdy group with not much law and order in place. And Hamilton and Butler felt that if the church was present, it would provide some kind of moral stability to a rather unruly settlement. And so they wrote to the bishop and said, would you please send a priest? And Addison accepted the call and left England in 1791, arrived in Quebec when it was autumn, and it would have been too late for him to get to Niagara before the lakes froze. So he stayed in Quebec for the winter and arrived here in July of 1792. Well, obviously this became a settlement simply because there were no roads, and the roads and means of transportation were by the water. So we're here where the river and the lake meet, and Fort Niagara, which was long established on the other bank of the river. So it was a point of some civilization. And I don't know that there was any other reason than that. Transportation was very important, how you were going to find yourself moving from point A to point B. And why the church was built in this particular location is open to some kind of debate. I suppose partly this was military land, and then this land for the church came as a grant from the government. And originally it was 8 acres. It's now just slightly over 6. We do know that the church is built of sandstone. A couple of geologists have looked into this, and they feel that it's possible that the stone came from Queenston. I believe that the church was built by the military who were here and didn't have anything else to do, and so whoever was in charge of the fort said, okay, we'll go up there and we'll quarry stone. Now, we believe that the stone used in the building of St. Mark's is the same as the stone in the powder magazine at Fort George. And it was fortuitous that the church was built from sandstone, because in 1813, when the town and the church were burned down, the walls of St. Mark's stood fast because they were sandstone and were able to sustain the fire. It's interesting to note that on the south side of the church, the stone is superior to the stone that's on the north side of the church, which just, I think, happened because they wanted the people who were driving by in their carts or horses or walking by would have a better impression than the people who'd be seeing it from the other side, because that's just the symmetry, and there weren't crowds of people out there all the time. There are a number of things about the cemetery that make it special. To begin with, we have to understand this is the oldest cemetery in Ontario. The earliest burial we know of, we have a record of, it took place in 1782. And we still bury people here. So it's been in constant use all of that time. So that alone means that there will be monuments that are very old, that are absent, that are in bad condition for one reason or another. 5 years ago, Sally Mitchell and I and a few others decided that we had to start some restoration work on some of these older monuments, or they weren't going to be here that much longer. So we're now just completing the 5-year bit of restoration, and in that time, we've restored over 100 monuments. It's a big undertaking in many ways, in that, to begin with, the work of restoration of monuments is very costly. So we had to raise money to do the work, and we were very fortunate that we found a man who was happy to work here because he understands the importance of this particular cemetery. It's quite hilly, with numerous ups and downs as you walk through it. And it maintains a park-like setting, as opposed to many contemporary cemeteries, which are neat, tidy rows. There are no neat, tidy rows out here. Because a family would say they wanted an area for burial of family members, and so they would take an area. And how they organized the graves within that area was pretty informal. So the whole look is informal, shall we say. And we have the original lay of the land, we have the informal grouping of these monuments, and then we have a huge and important collection of trees. Most cemeteries don't have many trees where there are graves, because you obviously are going to be in trouble digging graves when you have trees. Here, didn't seem to much matter. Somebody wanted a tree there, they put the tree there. If you liked it, okay. You didn't, okay. In the very beginning, this was the cemetery for the town of Niagara-On-The-Lake. The Catholics and the Presbyterians and the United had no cemeteries. They were all buried here. In the 1830s, the bishop, the Anglican bishop, was visiting, and he noticed that there was a Catholic interment taking place in the cemetery. And he was both mystified and probably horrified, and made it very clear that it was time that the Catholics and the Methodists and the Presbyterians get their own cemeteries. It has a very special quality about it because of what we've discussed. And we find there are many, many people who use the cemetery as a kind of shortcut from Ricardo Street to Byron Street. And they walk in one gate and walk through and walk out the other. And as they're walking through the cemetery, they're looking at things and making mental notes of what they have found. Cemetery monuments tell stories. At least old ones tell stories. Contemporary monuments are pretty well name, born, died. But from other periods of time, we often find out where the person originated. We often find out the relationship within a family, and then we can connect with other monuments nearby, because probably husband and wife are buried here, and wife's family are buried over here. So it becomes a wonderful study in genealogy and in family history, and just plain history, and just plain nosiness. I think that, for me, one of the important facts about this church is it still sits on land that was government land, and it's a whole parcel. A parcel is original. It didn't change. The church didn't move. It's where it was in the very beginning. And we have the oldest church in continuous use in the province. We have the oldest cemetery in the province in continuous use. We have the parish hall, and we have the rectory. We have all of these elements still here. So it's very special, if not unique within the country, to have the whole thing perfect and together. I hope that you have found this of interest and informative, and we are very happy if you will come and share the peace and tranquility and history that's a part of this incredibly special and important place. So do come and see us.